When police officers respond to domestic violence calls, they have several goals, including providing assistance to the victim. Up next, we're going to learn about the Lethality Assessment Program used by the Paducah Police Department. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Your City at Work. I'm Public Information Officer Pam Spencer. In 2013, the Paducah Police Department began using the Lethality Assessment Program, and they use it when they respond to domestic violence calls. Joining me today to talk about this program and a partnership with the Merryman House Domestic Crisis Center, we have Paducah Police Officer Austin Guill and Dana Sanderson, the outreach advocate with Merryman House. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Well, first, let's get a definition of domestic violence. I think a lot of people have maybe one thought in their mind, but it's a lot of avenues.
Yeah, and Kentucky state law describes domestic violence as physical injury, serious physical injury, sexual assault, or rape, or the imminent fear of those things. We as advocates also know that there's a lot more to that. It's a pattern of this power and control, which can include emotional abuse or financial abuse, in addition to physical assault.
Okay, this lethality assessment, that's a big phrase. What does lethality assessment mean? Officer Guill, kind of explain that.
There was research done in Maryland several years ago, and lethality assessment program keys in on factors that go into domestic assaults that can turn and will turn lethal, not just your basic physical assaults. These are factors that come in that have shown that the partner could be killed or is in very imminent danger of being killed.
Now this partnership, I think the Merryman House and the Paducah Police Department has had a partnership for years, but in 2013, a grant was provided, and it kind of explained what happened from there. What happened when the grant was awarded and the training that you went through?
Basically, the grant helped us get the program off the ground, and at that point I was trained by some of the folks from the Maryland research facility, and at that point learned about the lethality assessment program, how to train other officers in using the program itself, because this is a brand new thing for the department.
Now, what is the assessment itself? I mean, we have it here. It's actually a form. It's a form with questions. And I don't know, whoever wants to explain, how does this form actually help a victim and help you figure out what a victim needs?
The form itself is something that we do either after the perpetrator has been arrested or if we cannot locate the perpetrator. At that point, we begin to focus on the victim.
Okay.
We sit down with the victim, get some basic information, and then go through those series of 11 questions. And some of those are high priority questions. If they answer yes to any of those first 3 high priority questions, then we will automatically call the Merryman House to speak to a counselor. The next 7 questions, if they answer yes to 4 of those questions, that is also an automatic protocol in which we call the Domestic Violence Center at the Merryman House. But the form itself has become part of our policy, and it's used on every domestic assault that we deal with involving intimate partners.
Now, we were talking before the show started, intimate partners. You're not talking about a father and a son getting into a domestic fight.
Although Kentucky statute does deal with father and son and children and homes and things like that, the lethality assessment program is specifically focused on those involved in an intimate relationship.
Now, the first 3 questions here, I'm just going to go ahead and read these first 3 questions. Has he or she ever used a weapon against you or threatened you with a weapon? Has he or she threatened to kill you or your children? And the third one, do you think he or she might try to kill you? So we are talking about the possibility of death, and that's why this is so important.
Right.
Dana, the prevalence of domestic violence, do you have any kind of general statistics for this area, maybe for the U.S.?
In the U.S., 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will be victims of serious physical assault within their lifetime. Also, yearly in the U.S., about 1,500 victims die at the hands of an intimate partner.
Say that again. That's a big number.
1,500, yes. That is a big number. And from what I understand from past statistics, half of all of our assaults in Paducah are domestic violence assaults.
So how does that, as an officer, when you're getting those domestic violence calls, how does that make you react and feel that that is something that's very prevalent here?
Right, it makes you, sometimes you feel like you're more attached to that specific case. You see somebody that's being harmed physically, emotionally. There's always emotional abuse attached to a physical assault. And as an officer, it's hard to separate the emotional attachment you might find trying to help the victim, trying to prosecute the perpetrator. But the lethality assessment has really helped us do everything we can as an officer. When you sit down with the victim and ask those questions, we know that we're doing everything we can to extend the services that they need. And I know personally, since we've started using the Lethality Assessment Program, I feel like I've done a more complete job in my investigation of a domestic assault. It's not just an arrest and you leave the house. It's at this point we're sitting down, making sure they get the services they need, and it's more self-satisfying as an officer to really help the victim in the situation.
And you're doing this assessment, I mean, within minutes a lot of times of going on a call. I mean, how does a typical call, I guess, is there even a typical call? How does it kind of work, and when would you pull out this form?
Any domestic assault involving intimate partners is when the form is going to be pulled out. And there are many fluid domestic situations. When we start asking the questions, normally has to do with the location of the perpetrator. Okay. In an ideal world, there would be a domestic assault and we would show up quickly, find the perpetrator, interview the suspects, interview the witness, interview the victim, find the perpetrator. If there is enough evidence to arrest, we arrest at that point. A lot of the times there's a second officer that is available to start the lethality screen. So once we know where the perpetrator is at and maybe have him in custody or he could be gone from that location, we will start the lethality assessment screen.
Now when you're asking these 11 questions, there is something that is called a protocol that's triggered. Explain what happens. If somebody's saying yes or no to some of these questions, how does that work?
Any of the first 3 is considered automatic protocol. We're going to call the Merryman House if they answer yes to any of the first 3. Any of the next 7, if they answer 4 of those, that's also considered the automatic protocol. If the victim, whether it be out of fear or just they're not wanting to cooperate, if they answer no to the questions, but there's still an instinctual feeling from the officer, at that point we can call the Merryman House based on our belief at that point. And also if we think that it may be an incident that does not have a lethal circumstance involved or possibility of one, there is a no to that. But personally, I've never said no on a domestic situation. I feel like that if it has escalated to that level, that the Merryman House is a great resource to contact.
So you're dialing the phone. You're calling Merryman House with
Yes.
the victim sitting there, and basically you just hand the phone over?
Yes. We go to the point, if they screened in automatically or based on our belief, then we call the Merryman House. They generally ask for officer's name, they ask for the perpetrator and the victim's name. And at that point, we tell them we have engaged a lethality assessment, they have screened in, and we hand them the phone.
Have you had folks refuse and say, I don't want to talk?
Very, very rarely. And during the training that I received, the best way to go about it is to make the phone call, fill out everything that needs to be filled out. If they're saying they don't want to talk, you go ahead and dial the number, and you literally hand the phone to them and say, Dana wants to talk to you. You know, at that point, you've pushed it as far as you can, and you're trying to get them in the services. And at that point, I've had 1 refuse, I think, over the past 2 years, but a great majority of them will go ahead and talk.
And that's something that I guess before this program, you may have given them a phone number, but you didn't make the call and connect them right then and there.
Exactly. Before this program came out, there was a sheet that had several phone numbers on it, and we would explain to them the EPO process and things of that nature. But, you know, I felt like it was not sufficient. When I left a domestic call, okay, I arrested the suspect, possibly, but he's going to get out. And at that point, all I've done is laid a piece of paper on their table and walked out. I didn't do everything I could as an officer at that point. The lethality assessment exhausts all resources right then and there and pushes them into services.
Now, Dana, explain when somebody answers the phone, the crisis counselor, what are some of the things that they're going through that do they know immediately that it's a domestic violence call? I guess the officers told them that.
Yes.
And so they have a little bit of a background, and kind of what's their first goal?
First goal is to quickly establish some kind of relationship with that person on the phone, which crisis counselors are trained to, you know, in a different way than a police officer, to show that we're a listening ear. And I'm not saying that they don't, I'm just saying it's a different way. And so then what we can do from there is explain to them, not all calls are lethality assessment calls. The officer believed you were in enough danger in this situation. So we kind of tell them and inform them that their situation could be lethal. And then we want to safety plan with that victim. What that looks like is determining what they're going to do when the offender is released, or what to do if the offender's still in the home, whether they can file an EPO, which we can help with.
Now, what is an EPO again?
An emergency protection order. And then that last bit of information we want to do is bring them back to services. We want to do a follow-up phone call with them if they allow it, because in a 15-20 minute phone call we can't fix all the problems.
No. And their emotions are heightened at that time. We were talking before this episode started. It's almost like when you go to a doctor's office and you're hearing some news, you may only hear a portion of what the doctor is saying. And I would think a victim in that time is so heightened emotionally that they're probably not hearing every bit of services that you're providing that they can get.
Right.
So you really want the follow-up. That's your goal.
Yes. And especially because this is a crucial time when the offender is outside of the home. Generally, it takes 1 in 7 times for a woman to leave an abusive relationship. That's what the data is.
7 like incidents?
7 attempts to leave.
7 attempts. Wow.
Yes. And so this is a time where we really want to provide them with services at a time they most need them.
And what are some of the services in general that Merryman House can provide?
We provide legal advocacy services. We have the emergency shelter. We also have outreach services where we can provide economic support. We can do financial literacy training. We can do a lot of the self-sufficiency goals so a victim can live on their own again.
And you have male and female
Absolutely.
Clients, I guess you would say. Do you have very many male clients?
No, we don't, and I believe it's because it's a very underreported crime. Like I said, national statistics say 1 in 7 men are victims of serious physical assault in a domestic violence situation. So I think it's an underreported crime.
And I think what a lot of men may not realize is that you have the crisis counselors. They can talk. They can get that feedback that they need to try to help them through their situations too.
Absolutely.
In addition to the women, a lot of times just that listening ear, as you said, is very important for them. So there's the Paducah Police Department has taken this another step. What happens in 48 hours after a domestic violence call?
Within 48 hours, if there's been a lethality assessment call with intimate partners, we have a supplement form that we now do. The officer that is in charge of the case, the initial case, is responsible for following up with the victim within 48 hours of the initial assault. If that officer is not going to work over the next few days, he coordinates with a supervisor or another officer to make sure that somebody will be back at the residence to follow up with them. Sometimes they leave town. I had a victim that went to Cincinnati. I called her on the phone. It's basically, we're finding any way we can to follow up with the victim within 48 hours every time on an intimate partner domestic.
And what are you finding in some of these follow-ups? Are you seeing the de-escalation, and a lot of these victims are saying, oh, everything's fine now? Or what are you seeing?
Most of the time, recently even, I've seen that the perpetrator's no longer in the home. They're very thankful that we went to the lengths that we did to get them in touch with the Merryman house. The one I was talking about, that she had left town, I don't think she would have ever sought any services without the Lethality Assessment Program. And at that point, when she did go to talk to the Merryman house, she actually got the EPO. That would have never happened as well if it were not for the Merryman House partnership in this program. So I find it very successful, and I think it will continue to be a success.
And why do you think, Dana, that it takes 7 attempts? What are some of the reasons why it would take 7 attempts for somebody to leave a situation that they know is not healthy?
So many times a victim is financially dependent upon the perpetrator. So many times they're afraid of what will happen with their children. And the emotional manipulation is intense for these victims. And they've come to believe they can't do it on their own. And that's where the Merryman House comes in. We want to empower those victims to see you can do it on your own.
And in some of those plans, as you're working with some of these folks, is it something that takes some time for some of these men and women to be able to get to the point where they can
Absolutely.
walk away?
Absolutely. And Merryman House has no requirements on how long you receive services. So some people can come and find the emergency protection order is all they need. So some people are in our services for months or even years.
Goodness. Well, what are some of the other things that you've learned from this lethality assessment since the partnership's been since 2013? Are you seeing things that you would like to maybe change in the future or add to it? I know the police department added the follow-up.
Right. I think the follow-up is a great thing that we've done, just taking it one step further. You know, like I told you initially, several years ago, it was just a piece of paper with a phone number. We escalated that to the Lethality Assessment Program, and now the police department itself has come up with that 48-hour follow-up form. And something that has, I guess, opened my eyes in this situation is that there was a lot of negativity from officers towards domestic violence victims because of things that you mentioned. We see them right back in the home after we've arrested the perpetrator. And why is that? They're financially dependent. They're emotionally attached. There's kids involved. There's so many things that puts the victim in a helpless situation, and at some point they just feel like they need to turn back to the perpetrator. But the lethality assessment has shown me that the victims do want help. They do want services. They might not have chosen to seek those services with just a piece of paper on the table. With the lethality assessment program, they most of the time willingly take the help that the Merryman House is willing to provide.
So for an officer, I guess there was a little bit of frustration before.
Sure.
When you would go back to a repeat case and you're like, I've been here
Yes.
2 months ago or a month ago, and now you know that there's a plan hopefully in place too.
Yes.
And how does that make you feel, knowing that you've got this great partnership?
It's exciting and it's rewarding as well. We do know of the 1,500 people who die a year at the hands of an intimate partner, only 4% of those had sought services from a domestic violence program. So this is a unique partnership that opens up a door that wasn't there prior to this partnership. So.
And I guess it's that listening ear and knowing that there is help out there. And I think a lot of people have heard of Merryman House, but maybe they didn't know how to reach out. So if somebody's watching and they are in that situation, what do you want them to do?
Call the crisis line. That is how you can just open the door to our services, whether you do need emergency shelter or you don't, because we have a huge outreach program as well. Do you want me to provide that number?
Yes, go ahead, please.
1-800-585-2686. 24 hours a day. All services are free and confidential.
Can anyone call and be anonymous?
Absolutely.
Because I know some folks might just want to call and just see what happens.
Absolutely.
So you do get those anonymous calls that, and then probably you get them to call back.
Often.
So, because that is one of your main goals, is to make that connection where somebody doesn't feel alone anymore. So, well, since Paducah's not the only city doing this, this Maryland, research started in Maryland. What can you tell me about, I guess, across the nation? We're only one of several cities doing this program. Kind of, have you done any research to see what other cities are doing and how this Maryland program is faring, I guess?
From what I've seen, every department that has tried it out, I think realizes how important it is to get the services started. And you know, statistics can be skewed either way, depending on who's looking at them. But like I said, from the administration on down, I feel like it's a good tool for the community to see that a police department is trying everything they can do to get a victim into services. And at that point, I consider it, like I said, a success, because you said 4% of victims sought services over the, in the past. I guarantee you that number will be elevated a great deal in Paducah and in those other cities that are trying the program. And at that point, I think we can prevent a lot of lethal cases.
And also, you're saying the training. You went through training when this grant started in 2013. What kind of training did you get? I know Maryland, some folks from Maryland came here.
Right. The folks that came, basically, the first part of the training is to get your mindset right. You were asking me about frustrations earlier. A great deal of the officers do deal with frustration as a result of repeat offenses. You know, they're letting them back in the house and things like that. So you have to learn about the cycle of violence.
Right.
That's something you have to ingrain in your own mind as an officer. It's not their fault. They're financially dependent. They've got kids at the house. They don't know where to go. They have nowhere to go. Some victims in Paducah have left home across the country. They literally have nowhere to go. And at that point, you've changed your attitude towards the domestic violence situation, and that's how you start out. And at that point, you start getting into specifics of the lethality assessment, the research that was done to indicate that those 11 questions in the past have produced a lethal encounter. And at that point, you see why we're doing what we're doing. And then they just teach you the basics of, when to call, how to approach them on the phone call, handing them the phone, and screening them in based on your belief.
And you're one of the trainers there at the Paducah Police Department, so your goal is to get all the new officers trained in this?
Yes, that's part of our policy now. The lethality assessment is in our policy at this point. We've got a lot of new recruits going through the academy right now, and when they get back, their domestic violence training will consist of the lethality assessment program.
Well, in this, we've talked a lot about the victim. What about the offender? What's out there for the offender in form of services and outreach?
Based on our victim service standards given to us by the Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence, we do not provide any offender services. But what we can do is refer them to agencies that do those domestic violence assessments and therapy for those victims, for those perpetrators.
So there are programs out there to help the offender.
Yes.
There are counseling programs as well that are sometimes mandated or I think optional from the courthouse once the legal process starts. There's anger management, things like that from the prosecution standpoint.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you want to share about the LAP, the Lethality Assessment Program? Anything that the public needs to know that we haven't covered? Well, we've covered a lot of information here.
Absolutely.
I just want to express from our department standpoint the thankfulness we have for the partnership with the Merryman House. In my first 2 or 3 years as an officer, I talked to them rarely. I knew they were there, and like I told you earlier, I would put the sheet down with their number on it. Now putting a face to some of the counselors, the director, you know, as an officer, I know those folks. I know what they have to offer, and I have seen personally them help victims of domestic violence, and it's really rewarding. The partnership has been a very rewarding thing for me.
Absolutely. The Paducah Police Department has gone above and beyond what was expected of them with the lethality assessment by doing those follow-ups. So that just boosts our confidence in their capabilities of dealing with these situations.
Well, great work from both of you and both organizations. And I want to thank you both for joining me today. Thank you, Dana Sanderson, the outreach advocate there with Merryman House, and Officer Austin Guill. Thank you so much. Well, once again, if you need to talk to a counselor or to find out just more about the Merryman House, here's the 270 number. It is 270-443-6001. And as a reminder, you can see this episode and many more episodes on Government Channel 11, also on PaducahKY.gov. And thank you so much for watching Your City at Work.